Good evening, and welcome to CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Hominoff. My guest this evening is Frank Radice, expert in residence at Definition 6, and probably one of the most creative media guys that I know. So, Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Those are such beautifully kind words, Howard.
You now have to live up to it. So I didn't mean to put all that pressure on you. But Frank, and also, for the audience's sake, Frank, like me, is an alum of NBC, among many other illustrious stops for Frank in his career. So, Frank, the obvious place I have to start is in the last week, plus the Brian Williams saga, tragedy, however, fill in the blank. Kind of, what's your reaction to it? And if you were in NBC now, because there's only so much you could have done before, but what would you do now?
So a little history. Brian and I go back 20 some odd years. I was his marketing guy at WCBS, one of his first anchor jobs in his career, and then all the way through to the time he transitioned from Tom Brokaw to when he took over the show until about 6 years ago when I left NBC. So I actually was next to him through a lot, thick and thin. I was in post-Katrina stuff with him. I was in conventions with him. I was in the field with him. I was in the studio with him. So I know him really well, personally and professionally. And as I continued to know him, my respect for him never changed. So let's set aside, theoretically for a moment, if he did or didn't do what he is alleged to have done. Which is still under investigation, although ABC or NBC has given him a 6-month suspension. It's a terrible predicament, and I don't believe that he'll be able to survive it. It just feels like you're gone for 6 months. How do you come back and then remind people about what happened? I think that's a difficult turn. But whether he does come back or he doesn't come back, it gives NBC an opportunity to do something that they've never done before, that anyone's ever done before in the 6:30 newscast, and that's to change the way it's done. So that paradigm of the way 6:30 newscast has been for years, since the 50s, since the Camel News Hour in the 40s. I mean, except for that sort of native advertising part, it was something that was a single God, voice of God kind of thing. I think they have an opportunity now to change not only the way it looks, think TMZ, think Chasing New Jersey, think Vice Media, think Fusion, and to change the way that you bring in social media, use of Snapchat and Instagram and Vine, things like that. Ways to do music, to do television news that's real time, that's social, that's also more modern, that appeals more to a different demo. Now, the argument might be that they'll lose a lot of pharma advertising, so I personally think that CBS will be happy to take that pharma advertising, and that they will get a new type of advertiser, because in the end, it's a business. The business, though, is to tell people what they need to know in a trustworthy way so that they get the information factually. That's the problem that Brian has created for himself, and I'm not sure he'll be able to survive it.
What about that, that kind of the blend or the controversy of blending news and entertainment? And, not new, but it has will this somehow change things in some sense that now, I don't know, will it make news people more serious about news and create some line in a way that there hasn't been before?
I'm not sure that that's what will happen. We've had very strong newsmen be entertainment-oriented types of celebrities. Edward R. Murrow is a great example of it. You wrote about it. Edward R. Murrow would go from doing coverage of wars to person to person, which would be, let's take a tour through Zsa Zsa Gabor's house. Okay, so there was no problem with that. And by the way,
no actual hard news in that Zsa Zsa spot.
But there was no problem with that as he sat there smoking his cigarette while he was doing the interview. But just like smoking, that's gone. Nobody cares about that. Nobody, I believe, is going to care whether there is any crossover between their newsman, their hard newsman, and entertainment. There is no reason that any anchor cannot go from interviewing the President of the United States talking to Katy Perry about some charity thing. I don't think that there's an issue with that. CNN many years ago did the first ever live news, entertainment newscast. It was done like a newscast. It was part of CNN's image. It was there to actually look at the entertainment business as a business. So there is millions and millions and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars made by the record, or there was, by the record business, by the movie business. So we would tell you what was the top 10, what I say we because I produced it, what was the top 10 that week, what were the ratings that week, what were the box office that week, who were the #1 people on tour that week. So it was news, but it was entertainment. And now look, TMZ breaks stories. How many stories are there that you hear in the news today that they attribute to TMZ? TMZ does it differently. There's no, except for Harvey, who seems to stand in the front with his big cup, everyone that's a reporter that's out in the field shooting those stories is somehow now interacting with him, or even if they're in the field, they're on Skype. The thing feels newer and fresher and something different. I actually think that would be the way to do it. Now that looks and feels like entertainment, but there's no reason that it can't also be a way to distribute serious news. Now get to your exact question about whether people will accept their anchor that way. I believe that they will.
And, but you don't think anybody's actually going to do that
I
in
don't.
the midst of what's going on right now?
Absolutely do not.
Yeah,
I think that NBC will do exactly what the easiest answer is, and they have Lester Holt. He's a great guy. I've worked with Lester for a long time. I believe Lester will stay in that job. I think that he will. He has his sea legs. I think that he's going to be the guy that's going to be there. He's got not an insignificant understanding of social media and the way things are. He may be closer to a newer demo. Look, the demo for television news is 25 to 54. The average age of a television news viewer at 6:30 is somewhere south of 60. Yeah. It's not the audience that primetime wants, which is 18 to 49. That is not going to happen. Not in that market, in that space, and in that time period. Who's going to come home at 6:30 and sit down and watch the news anymore? How about give them something different? NBC isn't going to do it.
So, so speaking of innovating and not, but let me shift to sort of your current position and place from which you observe the media business, and that's at Definition 6, right? And I mentioned you have one of the cooler titles in the business, Expert in Residence. Tell us a little bit about what Definition 6 is in the kind of media ecosystem and what you're trying to do there.
Okay, so Definition 6 is an advertising agency at its core. It's a digital advertising agency if you move out a little bit from the core. It's a production and post-production company if you move out a little bit from that. It's a content management system and distribution organization if you move out from that. It's a media buying and planning company, so it's an advertising agency with a lot of legs. The one thing that we are aiming at in a very hard way is what's called transmedia. So transmedia is a way to market a television and or online or non-linear product that uses imagery and elements from it, from whether it's the storyline or the actual imagery, combined with some type of back end that's digital. So it may be that it's some API that we've created to make some kind of interaction happen between the program and you. So what is the interaction? The interaction is through manipulation of this app. For example, we could make an app, we could make a microsite. It makes you do something that creates a situation where you will actually then be inclined to go and do something else, which at the best is to go and watch the TV show that we're promoting, to turn the dial from one to another, to make it interesting, or to create a second.
You just stopped basically, although a whole generation on our show, it's dial. I'm sorry, what is that?
That would be the way to change the channels. Channels, what is that? Okay, so, yeah. Look, I'll fax you the answer to this question later. Okay. It's, so basically our ideas that we're doing right now are very transmedia oriented, and most of our clients are entertainment organizations. And although we do have other types of clients like Ford and GM, interesting, in two different parts of our company, Siemens, which is, so we have big clients that are non-entertainment organizations who are also interested in creating video content because everyone consumes video. if you were to look at people's use of smartphones today, there's a statistic I just read that 70% of the use of a smartphone, aside from the fact that it's a phone, is to consume video. 70% of smartphone use. So that shows the importance of it. So we're in that game, and we're in that game to stay. And I would put that in the transmedia sort of bucket.
And is there any real distinction anymore between, let's call it, traditional media marketing and digital marketing? Does that even, for a long time, both within media companies and others, you'd have sort of the digital group or the digital team, or does that still have any relevance?
Personally, that has no relevance whatsoever. It is, and there should not be any distinction, and there should not be two different groups, because everything is digital. What's analog anymore? Let me think. Nothing. So, but that said, everyone still has those two groups. Yeah. So it makes it much more difficult to try and conceive of an idea, get it through a process that requires that it gets approved, and then actually execute it and get it on whatever the distribution outlet is. It's because now it's going through the digital side and the creative services side. We find that a lot. But from our perspective as a vendor, we try to take all of that and make that our responsibility. So we'll go ahead and deal with that. But I don't think that there should be a distinction at all between creative marketing and digital marketing. It's really about marketing, and the rules are all the same. And also, the rules are all the same throughout the cultural differences in our society. You don't necessarily have to market to the fastest growing part of our society ever, the Hispanic market, for example, any differently than you would market to any other part of our society. They still are consuming pretty much the same content, and they're buying pretty much the same products. But they're doing them with this, because you will find, I'll give you another example. 75% of the Hispanic, non-Spanish speaking Hispanics in America have smartphones, and more than 50% have a digital device, and more than 50% of them have smartphones. And those smartphones are being used to make culturally relevant buying and purchasing decisions. So they're doing it using their phone. That's the digital divide. But that's not a divide. That's just the way it is, and so you got to go and attack it.
Is your work with Univision and sort of the Hispanic marketplace is sort of raises an interesting question. So, over time, does digital media, its ubiquity, the ever-spreading access to it, is it going to break that? There still is very much a kind of Hispanic marketing focus and groups, and there's part of it is the language, but part of it is also culture.
I would argue that that's the language that demands that there be that sort of thing.
Yeah,
but as
will that lessen? Over time?
I think so. Because look at the new channels that are out there now aimed at the Hispanic market, but in the English language. Fusion is a very good example of that, and it's being marketed just the way you would market any other thing, because there is no language issue there. Right. It's the language that creates that barrier. But there's also El Rey. El Rey is a perfect example. It's Robert Rodriguez's playlist, basically. You think that it's a Hispanic network, but half that show is made up of chopsaki movies from China. Right. And then you've also got there's just a lot of plays going. A Flama is another interesting play, which was just bought by Hulu. So now you're talking about how all of this content is starting to stream. So there's where it's going to. That's where it's happening. It's all about streaming and OTT right now.
And what is it that you're in an agency and you're both going to and clients coming to you. You're in a world where it feels like the agency business itself has been is seen as under attack or threatened, or margin pressure for certainly feels like as long as I've ever been involved in media, and probably they were probably saying this in the 20s.
This is
so
you're answering your own question.
But I'm gonna so I won't no. But I'll ask you, which is so. But it's something so different, so bad, so kind of now that the agencies are on the way out in some sense? I know it's not in out, but what's the future of the agency business looking like?
Bright. I'm really bullish on it. You hear this all the time. I've seen this cycle happen it happens about every 8 or 10 years. Well, we're going to pull it all in-house, forget the agencies. Right. And then that works for a little while until they go, oh, let's get an agency to bid on this. And the next thing you know, the agency's back in and they're doing it all again. And then 5 or 6 years later, they go, oh, gosh, look at how much this costs. This agency is ridiculous. Let's bring it all in-house. And then they start doing it. And then the next thing you know, a couple of years later, why don't we try an agency? It's just, so it's almost like, I would say we want that reaction. We want people to think that we're under attack. We want people to think that this is a really bad business to be in. This is a great business to be in. We are not under attack.
It's not so bad if a lot of other people decide not getting into that business. You're okay with that.
I'm fine. You know what? We certainly don't want to keep the good people out. Yeah. But we necessarily don't want these great people to come in and become our competitors. But look, it's just a cycle. That's all it is. Yeah. It's the same thing. NBC News may be back on top again. It's a cycle. The cycle is a little like moving an iceberg or trying to turn a big oil tanker. It takes a long time. People's habits of consuming content, except for millennials on the internet, are very strict. They watch, there is really appointment television. People will tune in to watch CSI. People will tune in to watch the Super Bowl. And people don't have to tune in to watch PewDiePie because he's got 30 million subscribers. If you don't know who PewDiePie is, find out.
One of the things that is gets a tremendous amount of buzz now, and the term for it seems to change every 18 months or so, which is from branded entertainment, branded content, native advertising, content marketing. Fill in the blank. There may be a new one this week. Talk a little bit about that, sort of some of your work in that, and where you see that going. How, first of all, sort of in some ways it harkens back to things of the Texaco Star Theater in the 1940s, right?
The Camel News Hour.
Which you started, right? So I don't know how new it is, but what's going on now that's really sort of most interesting and exciting about that?
You start with something that we all called back in the early days product placement, right? So product placement has become all of those other things that you just mentioned. Forbes magazine, for example, it's just been reported that Forbes will have a Prudential ad built into the cover of its next issue. That's very interesting. I don't know how I feel about that, but from a business perspective, that's just not a bad idea. I've done everything from create spots, we at Definition 6 for USA, where we've done them in conjunction with a car sponsor and used the stars from the show. But the shows themselves also insert products into things that you'll often see somebody driving a Lincoln Continental in a show, and that's not just because they rented a Lincoln. It's because Lincoln paid money to put it in there. It's business. It's a good way to back up making sure that your message gets out there, because it costs a lot of money to really get reach and frequency. Just because you have 33 million subscribers doesn't mean that 33 million people are actually viewing it. What it comes down to in terms of media distribution and how well integration works is whether or not somebody pays attention to it and does it. And that's the issue that's more prevalent today than anything, and it's called viewability. The sponsors, the people who are paying the bills, demand to know whether or not their commercial has been actually looked at. Did they actually see it? Not that it got 100 million impressions. What does that mean? It means, that's an impression. Do I remember what I just saw? Heck, I don't know what I had for breakfast. So it takes frequency of that message, and then it takes reach. So constantly reminding people of the same thing over and over again, and then reaching them as far out as you possibly can, which means as big a media buy as possible. And that's how a message gets out there. Too often I'll find someone that'll sit around and say, this is great, we're going to do a huge digital media buy, we're going to get 100 million impressions. That doesn't sell your product. That's why buying an ad in digital only does not deliver what a television ad might buy. Not yet.
So, so are you, by the same token of feeling bullish on the agency business, do you still, are you still bullish on TV as TV?
No.
And if not, why not?
I don't think that what we know as TV today will be TV in 2 years, 3 years. It will be, and it may or may not be on a screen. It may or may not be. It may be a hologram. But I can go as far as to say that because look, I mean, you can present Michael Jackson in a hologram at a giant concert stage. You can eventually do television in holograms. But I would actually argue that there needs to be a new word for it, because I'm not watching television, but I'm not in the demo. But I'm not watching that much television. I'm watching this. I'm watching my iPad. I go on a trip. I take a Chromecast with me and I put it into the nice TV set in the hotel room, and I stream movies from my cloud through my phone to my television. I'm not watching television.
But what you're watching, the content you're watching, is what we used to call, in some ways, TV.
Interesting,
right?
Interesting,
Which
except
is,
nobody does movies hardly anymore. So if
no,
I'm watching a movie,
you're watching a movie.
Yeah.
But if you're watching a sitcom or a series or or drama or a mini series of something, that's still traditional storytelling.
Yeah.
That,
well,
you know,
that's the key.
Right.
It's
so,
storytelling.
So it's still storytelling, and I guess so. If that still has an appeal, right? People
yes,
still,
well, but that's why Netflix and Hulu and Verizon, I'm sorry, Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and the stream, you know, even the new deal with Dish and Sling TV,
right.
All of that stuff is still distribution of content to a box that ends up on a screen.
Yeah.
So you know, but is it still TV? I think you can call it TV if it's on the box that's in front of your bed or down in your living room, but it's not TV when it's here. It's content. I would actually say don't even call it TV anymore. Call it content.
Do the evolving business models of you know, trying advertising in different ways, and whether it's native advertising or using social, etc., is that emerging set of business models going to continue to support the investment in the manufacture of great content as we've expected, or is it somehow now, well, we can't afford to do things the same way we've done them in the past? I mean, again, probably not an either or, but what's your take on sort of how much, you know, how much money is coming into the system to support that kind of production?
Well, there's clearly differences now between cost per thousand of programming. So in 5 or 6 years ago, a hit television show would have a 10 demo. Today, a hit television show is a 3 demo. That's a huge difference. So, you know, a show that might have had 30 million viewers, Friends, an ER, something in that must-see TV era, now you're lucky if you get a show that gets 10 to 14 million viewers. Yeah. That's a hit show. Right. You would not have said that 10 years ago. So, cost per thousand is the budget. You base your budgets for creation on cost per thousand. If the viewership goes down, the cost per thousand goes down, which means the budgets are decreased. So that's just a fact.
Right.
But now that there are new ways to create that content and new distribution models to get that content out there, there are ways to create content that are less expensive. For example, Netflix with House of Cards, it looks just like a movie. It looks just like a high quality television show. But I know they're banging through pages way more than you would if you were doing a traditional television show. I mean, they're doing 10 pages a day. And they're
how would that compare to what would typically be done on a network show?
Could be a couple of pages a day. The point is that they have a system down and they're banging through these things every day. So there is a production change.
Yeah. What about social, media? And let's focus, and that is, which that really didn't exist, at least the Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, et cetera, literally, unlike other things we're talking about, they did not exist not very many years ago. And now, right, they're everywhere and they're a part of almost every campaign probably you come up with. So how are you, where do you see that going, and how much are those platforms for your clients for content maybe to make money, or are they really just all kind of spending vehicles, marketing vehicles?
Well, we have a social practice at Definition 6. Tremendously important as a part of any campaign that we pitch, anything, because it's more than just a marketing tool. Certainly, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and certainly YouTube, are places where longer form content can actually exist, which means now with advertising on those platforms, they can be monetized. So a social campaign is a monetizable campaign which helps to draw the eyeballs to the campaign target, whether it's an entertainment target or a packaged good, whatever it happens to be. So now social is monetizable, and it's a marketing tool. So I see that as a absolute part of every campaign. And every social tool which is working well, whether it's Instagram or Snapchat. I mean, Snapchat has Snapchat Discovery now. You can go into Snapchat and see some really cool stuff. Who in the world would have thought that that was going to be where Snapchat went? I heard somebody last week say that the next big hit on television is going to come from Snapchat. And it was like, okay, that's an interesting
very
quote.
Quick hit, but
the thing is that you think that here's the problem, and I think it's a little bit of a marketing issue for Snapchat, is that people think that Snapchat is where you send pictures of body parts to your girlfriend and have it explode and go away in 10 seconds. Well, that is not what Discovery is. Yeah. Discovery is something that you can go into and you can look at, you can experience, and you can keep looking at, and you can share it. And it's just a different model. But Instagram, I mean, I know your daughter doesn't use Instagram. Doesn't use Twitter. She uses
internal note. Yeah. So for our audience at home,
she uses. How old is she? She's a teenager. So she uses Instagram the way people in their 20s and 30s use Twitter. So there's always going to be movement from device to device and from platform to platform depending on the demo.
So what does it take? What are you looking for, and we're here at a business school, we're part of Columbia University, a lot of people who'd love to go into this business, however it morphs and gets defined. What are you looking for from younger people who want to go into the business, whether it's at Definition 6 or to your clients or networks?
So the tools that are out there for younger people to be able to create and edit and do sound design and distribute content are easy to get, very easy to use. There was a movie that was made on iPhone 5Ss that just premiered at Sundance. I would look for somebody that can do all of that. Yeah, I can shoot, I can write, I can produce, I can edit, I can do sound design, and I can help you distribute it on one of my channels. See, I got a YouTube channel. Yeah, right. I want that first. Yeah, yeah. I want to know that they understand social media. I want to see, look, don't necessarily care that they've got 10,000 followers on Twitter or they've got 1,500 friends on Instagram. Yeah. I want to know that they know how to interact, because I look at social media as a tool to listen to what the audiences and the viewers care about, and to then take or look, even if you're an airline, they listen to what you write in social media and they respond. And often give you new seats or help you out, or that's what you need to do. How do you use social media? Do you use it that way? Do you use it with a thoughtful design, or do you just send pictures of your cat, which I have been known to do? So it's there, and I want to know that they know all of that. And I would also say that the very top line, if somebody says I can write, I'll probably, and then all that other stuff, that's what I'm looking for.
Well, that's about as good a lesson plan, I think, as I could develop for anybody. So Frank, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us this evening on CITI Media Reporter. Good night.